The strong-box arrived before the milk. Frances Sutton heard the cart in the dark of the court at 4:45, before even the sparrows had started under the eaves, and she came down to her shop door in her shawl to find two men she did not know setting a small Japan strong-box on her counter and leaving without a word. There was no bill of lading. There was a key tied to the handle with black thread, and a single sheet of paper folded once, in a hand she did not recognize, the letters pressed hard into the page as though written by a man holding himself very still. Take this and be gone from London before the assize opens. A coach leaves the Belle Sauvage at 7. Do not be in this city when my trial begins. There is enough here to keep you the rest of your life in any town you choose. Forget the court off the Strand. Forget what you saw. I beg you, for once in your life be sensible, and go. There was no signature. There did not need to be one. All London knew whose trial opened that week, and all London had its opinion of him. The Duke of Aldermoor, the cold soldier duke who had come back from the war wrong, they said, who would not look a man in the face when he spoke to him, who had been found in a dark court at midnight kneeling over a solicitor with the man's blood to his wrists. A ruthless man, the broadsheets agreed, and now a guilty one, buying off the only living soul who had seen the deed. Frances turned the key in the box. Inside, by the light of her one candle, lay more money than her shop had taken in the 11 years of her marriage and widowhood together. Banknotes in neat sealed packets, £2,000, a fortune to drown a tradeswoman in comfort for the whole of her natural life. Take it, her shopgirl Susan breezed over her shoulder, having crept down after her. Frances, take it and we'll go to my aunt's at Deal and never come back. They'll kill you, what you know. A duke's reach is long and an earl's is longer. Take the money. Anyone would. There's no shame in being alive. No, Frances said. There isn't. She closed the box. She did not go to the Belle Sauvage at 7. By 11 she had washed and dressed in her good dove grey, and by 5:30 she had hired a boy with a barrow and walked beside it across the city with the strong-box riding on the boards, every coin and note of it, untouched, back to the great shut-house in St. James's Square, where a duke was waiting under guard for the law to hang him. And the porter would not let her in, and she would not be sent away, and she stood on the step and made such a quiet, immovable scene that at last the box was carried in over her shoulder and set down, she was later told, on the very desk in the study where the Duke of Aldermoor sat refusing to write his own defense. He had sent the money before dawn. By noon it was back on his desk, and she had told the porter, with the calm that frightened him more than weeping would have, that she would be at Westminster on the morning the doors opened, whether his grace liked it or no. What she did not tell the porter, what she told no one, not even Susan, was that the Duke of Aldermoor had got the whole of it exactly wrong. He thought she had seen him kill Josiah Pell. She had seen no such thing. She had seen who did. And she had something in her shop, locked in the long oak press where the file copies were kept, that would prove it past the power of any earl in England to deny, if she lived to lay it before the right pair of eyes. She was not, it turned out, the witness everyone supposed. She was the one witness the guilty man in this affair could not afford to let live, and the innocent one could not afford to let die. And both of them, in their different ways, were trying to send her out of London to do it. She had no intention of going. They let her see him on the second day, in the end, because she came back, and the Duke confined to his own house under the watch of 2 king's messengers has very little to do but be told that a stationer's widow is on the step again and will not be moved. The room they brought her to was the library, stripped of anything a man might use to harm himself. 2 messengers at the door, and the Duke of Aldermoor standing at the cold window with his back to her when she entered. He did not turn at once. When he did, he turned only his head, and only so far, presenting her with the right side of his face, his good ear angled toward her, his amber eyes finding her across the room with a directness that the broadsheets had called arrogance, and that she understood, in half a second, was nothing of the kind. He held himself the way men hold themselves who have learned that the world will come at them from the side they cannot hear. Along the left of his jaw and up into the hair at his temple ran a fine constellation of old powder burns, blue-black under the skin, the mark of a gun that had burst too near him in some field she would never ask about. He was tall and very still, and not in the least cold. He was a man holding himself together with both hands and hoping it read as calm. "You are the most foolish woman in England," he said. "I went to considerable trouble to make you wealthy and gone. Instead, you have made yourself conspicuous. By tonight, every servant in this house will have said your name to someone, and by tomorrow it will reach the man who least ought to hear it, and you will be as good as dead. Why in God's name did you bring the money back? Because it wasn't mine, Francis said. It is now. I gave it to you. You gave it to me to make me into a liar, she said. And I am not for sale, Your Grace. Not at any price you can fit in a box. She set her chin. I have buried a husband and run a shop alone for 3 years against men who were certain a widow could be frightened out of a lease, a debt, a fair price. I am not easily frightened. You will have to find some other way to be rid of me. For a long moment, the Duke of Aldermoor simply looked at her, fully now, both eyes having forgotten to favour the ear, and something moved behind his face that he plainly had not meant to let move. Here was a person who had been handed a fortune and the open road and a guiltless conscience, and had walked 4 miles through the city to give it back because it would have required her to be a coward. He had not, she thought, met very much of that lately. A man on trial for his life meets a great deal of calculation and very little of the other thing. You don't understand what you are doing, he said, that the edge had gone out of it. Then explain it to me. I cannot. You can, Francis said. You simply have decided not to. They are different, Your Grace, and I think a man in your position ought to stop confusing them. It landed somewhere it was not supposed to land. She saw it go in. He looked away from her at last, out at the dead garden, and when he spoke again his voice had dropped to something almost without armour. What did you see? He said. In the court. That night. Tell me precisely what you think you saw, and then perhaps you will understand why I would rather hang than have you say it under oath. So that was where the misunderstanding lived. He believed her testimony would damn him. He had sent £2,000 to bury the one account he was certain would put the rope around his neck, not to silence a witness against the truth, but to spare a stranger the danger of telling it. The ruthless Duke of Aldermoor had spent a fortune trying to save the life of a woman he had never met, and let all London think him a coward doing it, because the alternative was letting her stand up in Westminster Hall and be murdered for her trouble. She understood it all in the space of one breath, and it changed the shape of him entirely. I saw, Francis said slowly, watching his face, a man strike Mr. Pell down from behind in the dark of the court, near midnight, by the light of a single lamp over the chandler's door. I saw that man go through Mr. Pell's coat and take a packet of papers from inside it. I saw his face when he turned the body over. Quite clearly, Your Grace, the lamp was almost above him, and it was not your face. She paused. You came after. You came running from the Strand end with no lamp at all, and you knelt in his blood trying to stop it, and that is what the watch found. You did not kill Josiah Pell. You arrived too late to save him, and the man who did kill him stood in the shadow of the arch and let the watch take you, and walked away with the papers, and has been wearing his innocence ever since like a very good coat. The Duke of Aldermoor went absolutely white. You saw his face, he said. I saw his face. You would know him again. I would know him in my grave, Francis said. It was the Earl of Marbury. The name fell into the stripped library like a stone into a well, and for a moment neither of them so much as breathed. The Earl of Marbury, the Crown's own chief witness, the respectable peer who had so reluctantly testified that he had come upon his old acquaintance the Duke of Aldermoor crouched over the dying solicitor and had raised the alarm with a heavy heart. The man whose grief-stricken account had put the Duke in this house under guard. Of course it was Marbury. Of course the murderer had appointed himself the witness. It is the safest seat in any courtroom. You see now, the Duke said very low. Why the money? He killed Pell to take back proof that Pell meant to give me. Proof that Marbury forged his own brother's will 8 years ago, that the earldom and 18,000 a year are stolen from his brother's daughter, a girl of 15 packed off to a school in Brussels, so that no one would look at her too closely. Pell drew that will. Pell's conscience turned. Pell wrote to me because I was his late brother's friend and a trustee of the true line, and Marbury learned of it and cut his throat in the dark and walked off with the only copy. I have nothing, Mrs. Sutton. No paper, no proof, only a dead man's blood on my sleeves, and the word of an earl against mine. I will very likely hang. And the one thing I will not do, the single thing, is allow the only person alive who saw him to stand up in open court and put a target on her back. He has killed once to bury this. He will not hesitate at a tradeswoman. Take the money. Go to deal. Let me hang. At least one of us will be alive at the end of the month, and I find I would very much prefer it to be you. He had crossed the room while he spoke, not meaning to, and they stood now an arm's length apart, the two messengers murmuring at the door, the cold light on the powder burns along his jaw. And Frances Sutton looked up at this man who was choosing the gallows over her funeral, and felt something turn over in her chest that had been still for 3 years. "Stop," she said softly. "Stop apologizing to me for trying to keep me safe, Your Grace. I am not the one on trial for my life. Stop deciding what I am permitted to risk. Tell me what you mean to do, or stand aside and let me do it, because I assure you I have not the slightest intention of being sensible while an innocent man is hanged for being too late to a murder." His hand came up to take her arm, to stop her, she never knew which. And hers had already risen, and for the space of a heartbeat, his fingers were a breath from hers, in the cold air between them. Near enough that she felt the warmth of him, near enough that the whole stripped room seemed to lean in around that small, unclosed distance. The library door opened. A messenger cleared his throat. "Time's up, Your Grace." They stepped apart as though scalded, and Frances Sutton walked out of St. James's Square with her heart going like a hammer and a thing in her mind she had not told him, because she had seen what telling him would do. He would only find some new way to spend his life protecting hers. She had not told him about the copy. She had not told him that 3 weeks before he died, Josiah Pell had walked into her shop off the Strand. Sutton's, law stationers and copyists, as the swinging sign had read since her husband's day, and had paid her 4 shillings to make a fair engrossed copy of a long and curious document concerning a will, and a second close copy for his own file, and that she, being her late husband's trained wife and a careful businesswoman, had kept the draft and the press copy and the entry in the receipt book exactly as the trade required. Marbury thought he had destroyed the last proof in the world when he took the packet off Pell's body in the dark. He had not. It was sitting in the long oak press in a stationer's shop, 3 feet from where Frances slept, and not one soul living but Frances Sutton knew it was there. She got home a little after 4. The shop was on fire. She smelled it before she turned into the court. The wrong smoke, oil, and not coal. And then she was running, and Susan was in the street in her nightgown screaming her name, and the front of the shop was alight, the little bow window blown out, 2 men she half saw going over the back wall into the dark. They had come for the press. They had not waited for night. Someone had been quicker to the thought of a law stationer's habits than even she had given them credit for. Someone had reasoned, as she had, that a copyist keeps copies, and had sent men to burn the proof and the woman together and call it a chimney gone up. Frances did not scream. She handed Susan to a neighbour, wrapped her shawl over her face, and went in through her own burning door. The press was at the back, scorched but shut, the oak holding where the deal counter had already gone. She got it open with the bar she kept for the shutters, and the smoke was a living thing in her lungs, and the heat was peeling the varnish in long curls, and she got her 2 hands on the bound file marked Pell J. April, and she dragged it out against her chest, and she went back out through the fire the way she had come in, and collapsed into the court, coughing up the inside of the night, while her livelihood burned to the ground behind her. She had the copy. The original will Marbury had drawn, in his own clerk's hand, with the forged codicil and the false witnesses' marks Pell had set down for the record. Every line of it, fair copied in her own careful round hand, with the date and the receipt, and Josiah Pell's own signature acknowledging the work, in a book that had never left her possession and whose chain no lawyer alive could break. It was no longer her word against an earl's, it was paper, and the man on trial did not even know it existed. She had until the doors of Westminster Hall opened in the morning to decide what to do with it, and she made the decision sitting in a borrowed kitchen at dawn, with her hands still black to the wrist and her shop a wet ruin behind her. She would not send word ahead, because word ahead could be intercepted, bought or burned, as everything in this affair had been intercepted, bought or burned. She would carry it in herself. She would put it into the hands of the court with her own hands, in the one room in England where even the Earl of Marbury could not have her quietly killed. The floor of the House of Lords, before the assembled peerage and the Lord High Steward and the whole watching world. She sent 1 line to St. James's Square by Susan, by hand, sealed, "I am coming to your trial. Do not have your counsel turn me away. Trust me 1 inch further than you trust your fear. F.S." It was the choice, and she made it knowing it could not be unmade. A respectable woman did not insert herself into a peer's murder trial. A witness who came forward against the Crown's chief witness, an earl, was a woman who would be torn to ribbons by every newspaper in the land, whatever the verdict. Her name, her widowhood, her burnt shop, her presence at midnight in a dark court, all turned into something filthy by men paid to do it. She would never again be merely the respectable Mrs. Sutton of the Strand. She signed the note anyway, and sent it, and burned her old safe life as thoroughly as Marbury's men had burned her shop. The Duke of Aldermoor, when the note reached him, did the thing she had been afraid he would do. She learned it only at the door of Westminster Hall the next morning, in the grey crush of robes and pikes and the murmuring crowd. Learned it from Bellamy, the Duke's man, a square grey old corporal who had carried his master off a field in Belgium 3 years before and had not left his side since, and who now caught her arm at the foot of the steps with his face wrecked. "He's told his counsel to refuse you, missus," Bellamy said. "Send for Mr. Garrow at 6 this morning. Instructed him plain, no witness named Sutton is to be called, nor let near the bar, and if she comes forward she's to be named a paid creature of the defence and disowned from his own mouth. He means to go down sooner than let you stand up there and be marked. He had me swear to keep you out. I'm breaking it telling you. But missus," the old soldier's voice cracked, "he's chosen the rope. He's chosen it so they'll have no reason left to come for you. There's no talking him off it. I've tried since 6. There it was, the cost of every choice they had each made, arriving together at the top of the steps. She had chosen to come, he had chosen to refuse her, to throw his own life into the gap to shield her, and in doing so he had taken the one weapon she had and tried to break it for her own good. If she walked in now and was disowned from his own mouth as a liar bought by the defence, the copy itself would be tainted. A forgery produced by a paid woman, the court would say, exactly as Marbury would need them to say. He had, out of love he would never have called by its name, very nearly handed the victory to the man who murdered Josiah Pell. Frances stood on the steps of Westminster Hall with a burnt file against her chest, and understood that to save him, she would now have to defeat him too. "Bellamy," she said, "get me to a door he doesn't control." The hall, when she came into it, took the breath clean out of her. She had never seen such a room. The vast hammer-beam roof, lost in its own height, the peers ranged in their scarlet and ermine on their benches like a bank of coals, the Lord High Steward beneath the canopy with the white staff of his office, the bar where the prisoner stood, and the prisoner himself, the Duke of Aldermoor, very straight and very pale at the bar with his good ear turned toward the court, not knowing she was in the room. The Earl of Marbury sat at his ease among the witnesses, a heavy, handsome man with a mourning band on his sleeve for the friend he had murdered, and he was, at that moment, partway through telling the assembled peerage of England how it had grieved him to find his old acquaintance crouched over poor Pell's body in the dark. "And I called at once for the watch," Marbury was saying, in the warm, regretful voice of a reasonable man. "Would to God I had come a minute sooner, but I saw what I saw, my lords, and I will not perjure my soul to soften it, however the friendship between us once stood." "You will not perjure your soul," Frances Sutton said, from the body of the hall, in a voice that carried up into the great dim roof, "because you have not got one left to perjure." Every head in Westminster Hall turned. She walked forward through the murmur and the rising noise, a small woman in scorched dove grey with black still in the creases of her knuckles, the file held against her like a breastplate, straight down the open floor toward the bar. And she watched the Duke of Aldermoor turn and see her and go grey with horror, and she watched the Earl of Marbury, for one unguarded instant before he remembered his face, go grey with something else entirely. "My lords," she said to the Lord High Steward, to all of them before any officer could lay a hand on her. "My name is Frances Sutton, widow, law stationer of the Strand, and I was at my window above the court where Josiah Pell was killed, and I saw it done, and the man who did it is sitting in your witness box wearing a band of mourning for the friend he murdered. And before you decide whether to believe a tradeswoman over an earl, which I know how it sounds, my lords, I am not a fool, I would have you look at what is in my hand, because it does not require you to believe me at all. This woman is paid." Marbury was on his feet. "She is a creature of the defence. Even the prisoner's own counsel will not vouch for her. My lords, I protest." "The prisoner's counsel," Frances said clearly, "was instructed this very morning by the prisoner himself to refuse me and to call me a liar. He did not want me here. He would rather hang than have me here." She did not look at the Duke as she said it, but she heard him make a sound, low, as though he had been struck. "Does that sound, my lords, like a man and his bought witness in concert? He has spent a fortune and his own neck trying to keep me out of this room. The only person in England who wished me to walk through that door is myself." The Lord High Steward leaned forward. "And what is in your hand, Mrs. Sutton?" "3 weeks before he died," Frances said, "Josiah Pell paid me 4 shillings to make fair copies of a document. Solicitors use law stationers for such work, my lords. It is the most ordinary thing in the world, and it is why a copyist keeps copies. The Earl of Marbury cut Mr. Pell's throat to take back the only proof in the world that he forged his late brother's will and stole the earldom from a 15-year-old girl now hidden in a school in Brussels. He took the original off the body in the dark. He burned my shop 2 nights ago to be certain of the rest. She lifted the file. He did not know a law stationer keeps a press copy and a draft and an entry in the receipt book in her own hand, dated, with the dead man's own signature acknowledging the work. He has spent a murder and an arson and £2,000 of another man's money to destroy a thing that was sitting in an oak press 3 feet from where I sleep. Here it is, my lords, every word of the will he drew, and the codicil he forged, and the false marks of witnesses who never lived. I will swear to how it came into my hands, and so will my receipt book. And so, if you send to Brussels, will a girl who is the rightful heir to everything that man is wearing. The hall erupted. She crossed the last of the floor and laid the file open on the table before the Lord High Steward, and the peers came down off their benches to crane at it, and the clerks fell on the receipt book, and the Earl of Marbury made it 3 strides toward the door before the sergeant-at-arms and 4 other men closed around him. And his fine, reasonable face came apart at last into the thing Francis had seen by lamplight over a dying man, and he was still shouting that it was a forgery, a paid woman's forgery, as they bore him out of the hall where 8 years before he had taken his stolen seat. And through all of it, the Duke of Aldermoor stood at the bar and watched her, only her, with his whole heart undefended on his face in front of the entire peerage of England, having been saved, against his explicit and dying wish, by the one person he could not frighten, could not buy, and could not, it was now perfectly and publicly plain, live without. They did not even retire to vote. The Lord High Steward put it to them where they stood, and one after another, hand on heart, the peers of England gave their verdict upon their honour, and the word went round the great hall like a tide coming in. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, until it reached the foot of the canopy, and the staff was broken, and the Duke of Aldermoor was, before the noon bells, a free man. He found her in the crush outside, on the very steps where Bellamy had caught her that morning. He did not care who watched. He took both her blackened hands in his. "You disobeyed me," he said. His voice was not steady. "I had Garrow swear to keep you out. I told them to call you a liar. I would have hanged to keep you off that floor. And you walked onto it anyway, and you saved me. And you have ruined yourself doing it. Your name will be in every filthy paper by morning, and I—" He stopped. He turned his head, the old reflex, the good ear, then deliberately turned it back and looked at her full on, both eyes, as he had only once before. "I have spent 3 years since the war certain that nothing could reach me, that I had been burnt past feeling, like the side of my own face. And then a stationer's widow handed me back my money and would not be sent away, and I find I was not burned at all, only waiting. Francis, I am not a man who says things lightly, and I have just learned in the most public way in England that I cannot keep you safe by keeping you out. So I will do the only thing left. I will keep you beside me, where I can at least be ruined alongside you, for the rest of my life, if you will have a deaf and graceless duke who tried to bribe you out of the best thing that ever walked into his trial." "Your Grace," Francis said, "I gave the money back once already. Do be careful what you offer me. I have a habit of returning the wrong gifts and keeping the right ones." "Then keep this one," he said, and he kissed her on the steps of Westminster Hall with all the broken open hall pouring out around them, a kiss that had no coldness in it anywhere, the long-held breath of a man who had stopped, at last, holding himself together with both hands, because someone else had taken hold of him, and the crowd, which had come to see a duke hang, went home having seen something it liked a great deal better. The papers were every bit as filthy as he had promised for about a fortnight. Then the Earl of Marbury was tried in his turn in that same hall, attainted of murder and forgery, stripped of the title and the 18,000 a year, and hanged that autumn before a crowd that remembered the dove-grey woman who had named him. And the rightful heir, a quiet girl of 15, was brought home from Brussels to an earldom and a fortune and a guardian in the Duke of Aldermoor, who took the trust as seriously as he had taken everything since the day he stopped pretending to feel nothing. After that the papers found other widows to invent. A little over a year later, on a bright morning the following June, the Duchess of Aldermoor stood in the window of a house in St. James's Square that was no longer shut, no longer guarded, the dust-sheets gone, the fires lit, and looked at the small Japan strong-box that sat now on the mantel of her husband's study where the press copy of a forged will had once decided everything. It held no money any more. It held a child's first curl of dark hair, and a receipt for 4 shillings in a dead solicitor's hand, and a single sheet of paper pressed hard into the page by a man who had once begged her, for once in her life, to be sensible and go. She had kept it. She kept all the right gifts. Her husband came in behind her and put his arms around her and rested his chin on the top of her head, turning, out of long habit, his good ear toward the door. And then, because she was the one person in the world he never needed to hear coming, turning it back again. "You are smiling at that dreadful box again," he said. "I am thinking," Francis said, "that you sent it before dawn, and I had it back on your desk by noon, and I was already inside before you knew what I meant to do." She leaned back against him. "You should have known then. I am not a woman who can be bought out of a room she has decided to walk into." "I know it now," said the Duke of Aldermoor, to the lasting terror of every earl in England, and he held her in the bright unguarded morning, in a house full of running light, where no one any longer was waiting to be hanged, and no money sat in any box, and the only thing kept under lock and key was a little of the proof of how she had loved him.